My grandparents gave me a trip to Rome, but my parents made me give it to my sister. She wrecked her cab on the way to the airport, so I took the ticket back and went myself. Hey guys, so here's the story. I'm an 18-year-old girl, and on my birthday, my paternal grandparents gave me this incredible gift, an international trip to Rome, along with a check to cover my expenses. They handed me an envelope with the flight ticket inside, and I was super excited. But the very next day, my parents started pressuring me to give the ticket to my older sister, June, who's 21. June is basically the golden child in our family, if you haven't figured that out already. My parents began telling me that since June is an architecture major, a trip to Rome would be perfect for her to see all the amazing architectural designs up close and enhance her studies. I tried to argue, saying I wanted to major in literature and that Rome was just as important for me. Plus, when June turned 18, she had the chance to go on an international trip too, but she turned it down, saying she'd rather have the money instead. So it was my turn now, and I wasn't about to give it up. I even told them that the airline doesn't allow ticket transfers unless it's a really serious situation, but they brushed that off, saying they'd handle it. Fast forward a couple of weeks, and after numerous arguments and a lot of emotional blackmail from my parents, I finally gave in. It was clear they wouldn't stop until I agreed, and they kept reminding me of everything they've done for me, asking for this small favor in return. I thought it was super unfair, but I was tired of the drama. Besides, I figured I'd still have the check. I didn't really believe the tickets could be transferred, so I was kind of hoping it would fall through. But lo and behold, they managed to do it somehow. Yesterday, when I was supposed to leave for the airport, June took my boarding pass and left for the airport instead. Then we got a call from the cops saying there'd been an accident. Turns out, June tried to take over the steering wheel from the cab driver because she thought he was going the wrong way. They lost control and crashed into a tree. June got away with just a few scratches, but the cab driver was seriously hurt, with a broken arm and a deep cut that needed stitches. The cab driver pressed charges against June, and now my parents have to dig into their life savings to bail her out and possibly settle with the driver to avoid a trial. When I heard this, I couldn't help myself and blurted out that this was karma for forcing me to give up my Rome trip. My parents were stunned and told me it wasn't something to joke about. I instantly regretted saying it, but they wouldn't let it go, calling me selfish for saying such a thing about my sister's accident. That pissed me off even more because it was really hypocritical of them after everything they had said about my Rome trip being a waste if I went. I pointed this out, but they refused to respond and left to see June at the hospital. I was so mad that I made a snap decision to go to the hospital myself. I realized that no matter what I did, my family would never appreciate or value me, so I might as well live my life the way I want. I quickly packed a small bag with essentials, got a cab, and followed them to the hospital. When we all arrived, my parents and I ended up getting there almost at the same time. June was still talking to the cops, trying to explain how the accident wasn't her fault. Honestly, even though it was totally her fault, I wasn't there to confront her. I just walked up to her and asked if she had the boarding pass. She looked super confused and disoriented, so I just grabbed her purse and started digging through it myself. When I found the boarding pass, I snatched it and dashed back to the cab, leaving everyone bewildered. I raced to the airport and, thank goodness, made it just in time. I boarded my flight, and off to Rome I went. I didn't even check my phone for calls or messages until I landed. Only a few hours ago did I realize how mad my family is at me. My parents think I was incredibly insensitive, especially since June had just caused a terrible accident. It's like they gloss over her part in it every time. They're upset because they think all I cared about was my trip. June's also mad because she thinks I stole this opportunity from her, even though she was the one who took it from me in the first place. If anything, I was just reclaiming what was rightfully mine. Everyone seems to think I did the wrong thing, so now I'm supposed to apologize. But honestly, I'm not sure if I should. When June even messaged me, saying our parents would have to dip into their savings to settle with the driver, and I know our financial situation isn't great. I could have saved the money and given my parents the birthday check instead of spending it on this trip. But yeah, I was just being plain selfish. People have been asking a lot of questions, so let me clarify a few things. First off, the boarding pass situation. I doubt my parents or June figured out how to transfer the ticket. I think their plan was to just show up at the airport and wing it. If they had managed to do something about it, I wouldn't have been able to board with my passport since it was issued to June. So I guess their lack of a plan worked out in my favor. As for why I kept living with my family, despite being treated badly, you've got to understand that this is what I've known all my life. I'm not saying it's okay, but my parents' preference for June made me feel like I had to work harder to win their approval. I spent 18 years trying to be the best daughter so they'd finally like me, which led to a lot of disappointment and heartbreak, but I never wanted to give up because I foolishly thought they'd eventually come around. My grandparents don't live nearby. They're way out in the countryside, far from everything I know. The idea of moving in with them did cross my mind many times, but I didn't want to change my lifestyle. Plus, they don't know how my parents treat me because we hide it pretty well around others. That's why I never seriously considered leaving my family. But now that I'm an adult, I think it's time I stop trying to please everyone. As for my relationship with June, we've never been close. We don't hate each other, but we just don't get along. And about my family's financial condition, we're not well off. We're actually on the lower end of the spectrum. My mom works as a job title, and my dad is a high school football coach. They often rely on my grandparent insurance for money, and if they want more now, they'll have to come clean about what really happened. A lot of people asked why June was in the passenger seat of the cab. Honestly, it's just out of habit. Even during family road trips, she always sat in the front. I guess she's a bit of a control freak. She even grabbed the steering wheel because she thought the cab driver didn't know the best route to the airport. Her need to control everything is what caused the accident. She left for the airport almost 5 hours before her flight was supposed to take off. Make of that what you will. Update. So, after thinking it over for a couple of days, I decided to just enjoy my trip. It's unlikely I'll get another chance like this once I start college. I don't need to worry about my parents or anything back home. They're adults and can handle their own mess. Besides, it's not my fault they tried to take what wasn't theirs and got hit by karma. You were right. It was foolish of me to expect them to appreciate my sacrifice. They'll always be the same, and I don't need to keep trying to please them. So, I've been really living it up here in Rome. Seriously, I'm having the time of my life. This morning, I had a deep chat with my grandparents for the first time about everything I've been dealing with at home. I've never talked about it with anyone before, not even my friends. They had no idea about the crap I went through with my parents, who were always playing favorites with my sister. Finally, opening up and talking about it felt so good. A lot of you guys have told me I should speak up, so I did. I told my grandparents everything, and they were absolutely shocked that this had been going on for so long without me saying a word. I explained that I always thought if I just stayed quiet and tried to be a good daughter, my parents would eventually appreciate me. But now it's clear to me that's never going to happen. My grandparents told me I did the right thing by opening up to them. They even said that when I get back from Rome, I should go straight to their place. They want me to move in with them, away from my parents. When I mentioned that I'd be moving out for college in the fall, they said not to worry because they'd cover all the expenses. Just one conversation with them seems to have changed my life completely. Now, I don't have to worry about where I'm going to live once I get back, especially since I've seriously pissed off my parents, and there's no way they'll welcome me back with open arms. My parents had already made it clear they wouldn't be able to pay for my tuition, even though they paid for my sister, June. They used the excuse that they'd already supported one daughter through college, so I was on my own. But now, thanks to my grandparents, that isn't something I have to stress about anymore. I'm so relieved and happy with how things have turned out. In just a week, I'll be back home, but living a much better life. Update. So my trip ended a few days ago, and now I'm staying with my grandparents, just like they told me to. They already had the guest room set up for me and moved all my stuff from my parents' house. They welcomed me with open arms. After our talk, my grandparents confronted my parents. My parents had actually called them over because June had an accident, and they wanted to discuss how to handle the settlement without dipping into their savings or going to trial. There was dash cam footage proving June caused the accident, so an out-of-court settlement was their only option. But when they met, my grandparents insisted on talking about the way I was treated first. At first, my parents tried to dodge the questions, saying they were there to discuss June's situation, not mine. But my grandparents pressed on, and eventually my parents snapped and admitted everything. They even accused me of being jealous of June and only showing up at the hospital to grab my flight ticket for Rome. They claimed they had never treated me unfairly and that I was just being entitled and spoiled. That was all my grandparents needed to hear. They argued with my parents, who ended up telling them they didn't need their help and didn't want me back. My grandparents packed up all my stuff and moved it to their place. When my grandparents told me everything, I broke down. It hurt so much. Even though I knew my parents didn't care about me, they were all I had known for 18 years. My heart was shattered. I pray nobody else has to go through crap like this, but I'm so grateful my grandparents have been there for me. Now, I'm not confused anymore. This is my home now. I'll be going to college in a couple of months, but until then, I'm here with them. So, my grandparents have been super supportive and promised to be there for me no matter what. Even when I head off to college, they've assured me that I don't need to stress about finances because they're going to handle all my expenses. Honestly, it's such a relief. Since I came back from my trip, I've had zero contact with my parents, or June. I hadn't even bothered to check the last few messages they sent because I wanted to enjoy my trip without any drama. But today, I finally felt mentally ready to read them. Oh boy, am I glad I waited. If I'd seen them earlier, I definitely would have had another breakdown. June's messages were basically a rant saying, I'm selfish, entitled, and spoiled. She even ended with a snarky remark about how she's glad she won't have to deal with me anymore because I don't deserve her company. Honestly, I think she's the one who doesn't deserve my company, but whatever. It's not like it matters to me now. The real gut punch came from my parents. They sent a couple of messages calling me heartless for what I did, and saying they should have stopped me the moment I showed up at the hospital. They blamed themselves for not raising me right, and even took a jab at me for escaping to go on my trip. They didn't stop there. They laid out a list of how they've always provided for me, sent me to school, fed me, clothed me, and kept a roof over my head. According to them, I had nothing to complain about, and I was just being unfairly jealous of June. They ended by calling me a waste of their time and energy and said they were glad to be rid of me. That really stung, and I almost broke down in tears. But I remembered my promise to myself after talking to my grandparents. I wasn't going to let their harsh words get to me anymore. So I held back the tears, blocked their numbers, and decided it's time to start my healing journey. I seriously need to move on from all the trauma they've caused me if I want to live my best life. I don't know if it's entirely possible, but I've got to try. Now for the crazy part, something wild happened today. It's been about 2 weeks since I got back from my trip, and I've been in the dark about what's been happening with my parents and June. I'm guessing they're still struggling to settle with the cab driver outside of court. Anyway, this afternoon, my parents showed up at my grandparents' house in a total rage. They didn't even acknowledge me when I opened the door. They just stormed straight to the living room to talk to my grandparents. I was so confused and just hovered around awkwardly until my grandparents invited me to sit with them. I could tell my parents were annoyed about me being included in the conversation, but they didn't say anything. My grandparents asked what was up. Since the last time they spoke, my parents made it clear they wanted nothing to do with them because they supported my decisions. My parents said they were going to stick to that, but needed to settle some scores first. They pulled out a document with a bunch of calculations and demanded my grandparents pay back all the money they spent raising me. I was stunned. They were asking for nearly $120,000. It was just a spiteful move to make us feel small. My grandparents asked for a moment to discuss it privately, leaving me in a painfully awkward silence with my parents, who still refused to even look at me. When my grandparents came back, my grandpa calmly said that, yes, they'd take responsibility and repay the amount. I was about to object because it was so unfair. My parents did the bare minimum and didn't deserve a dime from my grandparents. But my grandparents told me to let them handle it. Then they added a condition. They'd repay the amount, but only if my parents would. So, get this. My parents had been borrowing money from my grandparents for years, and they were completely stumped when my grandparents finally called them out on it. You could see the shock on their faces. It was like they got totally owned. Seriously, they looked like deer caught in the headlights, and I found it hilarious. I had to leave the room because I was about to burst out laughing. I didn't come back downstairs until after my parents had left. When I finally asked my grandparents what went down after I bailed, they told me my parents tried to argue their way out, but there was no getting around it. Eventually, they ended up cursing at all of us and stormed out in a huff. Classic parent move. Honestly, I don't think they'll be back anytime soon after that embarrassing episode. Even if they do come back, it won't be a big deal. My grandparents have shown they can handle them just fine, and they're not going to go easy on my dad just because he's their only son. Plus, I'll be off to college in a few months, so I'm mainly looking forward to that. Oh, and taking that trip to Rome was probably the best decision I've made in a while.